You know something is wrong with the world when you're asking it day by day not to provide more writing material for a dystopian thriller. But why am I thinking that? Maybe because, for the past 30 to 40 years, and through many different forms of media, we have been conditioned to find such terrible futures romantic, almost desirable? Well, in visual media at least. Buckle in, because this is going to be a wild one. Also, for context, I'm using the term romantic in its older form, describing a chivalric or adventurous tale of heroes, not something that ends at the bedroom door. Hello, ladies and gentlemen and everyone in between, and welcome to the third new episode of Author Talks. This is where I, Thomas Wrightson, talk about whatever is eating away at my mind, albeit in a more scripted style with this season. This time, in what might be a shorter episode, a phenomenon that has become pressing in my mind with issues like Ukraine and the USA and the UK and Gaza being in the situations they currently are. I won't linger on the current geopolitical situation other than to comment that it's utter shite, and while I don't mind change on principle, I'd rather it be done without killing or disadvantaging vast swathes of the population to service the egos of the few. But those situations, and indeed any situation which sees calamity and devastation, is something that fiction deals with a lot, and most of the popular ones have inspired whole aesthetic movements or created an almost nostalgic sensation around them, when the goal of the creators was likely anything but. Think about it. What comes to mind when, say, you think of The Matrix? Some might remember the gloomy setting, the increasingly relevant topics of government overreach and virtual worlds, and the usual question of individuality versus collective well-being, and the metric ton of philosophy. Or they might possibly remember the really grim and bloody battles between humans and the machines. But most people will almost certainly remember cool people in black clothing doing wild martial art tricks impossible in the real world. It's basically an open world sandbox scenario turned into a sci-fi film, or vice versa considering the time the film was released. The visuals and cool moments often trump a setting and scenario that's ultimately rather depressing. Looking at these situations, I feel that films and video games can largely be held responsible for this. Films are intended to be successful, and especially now with a shrinking corporate environment and the dual impacts of COVID and home entertainment, the mainstream space is becoming risk-averse compared to the 1950s to 1980s. You may think choosing that period is bonkers, as part of it covers the implementation of the infamous Hays Code in the USA, but some of the most harrowing depictions of post-apocalypse and serious scenarios come from this time period. It also helps, in quotes, that it was during this period that the active Cold War between the USA and Russia was taking place, with numerous proxy wars in other countries playing out their conflict on a local level. There are elements of this discussion that I may not cover in great detail, but Overly Sarcastic Productions has already done that in their video on the post-apocalypse. And while not actively touched on by Red, it does show the tendency to retroactively romanticize something. With the destruction of the old ways comes a kind of freedom most people wouldn't dream of, that kind of thing. It's particularly pointed in the fantastic vistas of Studio Ghibli, or the pretty exciting and almost magical scenes presented in the otherwise fairly grim Titan AE. These are worlds where beautiful people go through beautiful ruined settings on adventures of wonder, if not whimsy, and the horrible events which caused it are secondary at best. In relation to this aesthetic buffering, I'll reference Dami Lee's video on solarpunk and how it contrasts to the popularity of cyberpunk. Lee pinpointed something that perhaps explains a lot: Hollywood sexy men. Many settings that are otherwise grim and unpleasant and unsettling usually have aesthetically appealing actors in the leads. Whether it be Harrison Ford and Ryan Gosling in the Blade Runner films, Will Smith or Tom Cruise in anything they do, the ripped and cool physiques of leads in Terminator and Judge Dredd titles, the whitewashed Katniss as played by Jennifer Lawrence in The Hunger Games, insert shonen anime here, the smooth lines of Keanu Reeves in Cyberpunk 2077 and The Matrix, there it is again. None of these worlds shown are at all pleasant, certainly not in real life, but they are glamorized by Hollywood-esque bling. And a third of the titles I just mentioned aren't even American. There is a mythological as well as a modern precedent for focusing on the silver lining of destruction. Practically every major mythology and religion has either a past or future moment where everything is burnt to the ground or washed away, for a seemingly better world or at least a fresh start, whether it be the complete endings of the Abrahamic faiths or the more cyclic designs of Hindu and Norse mythology. There's even a word, eschatology, which refers to the study and preoccupation with the end of ages, or even the end of human civilization. I must emphasise human, because many of the scenarios in fiction until relatively recently didn't cover the other varied species on Earth, but those are different. They're myths and folklore talking about endings from which something better arises, not smooth-cheeked hotties doing fine thank you while the world's already burning. Then there is media where the world isn't dead, but it's certainly dying. There is a specific subgenre of science fiction and fantasy called dying world fiction that covers this, but I think the stuff usually lumped into this category makes the category itself slightly reductive. There is so much dying world fiction out there when you look for it, and while much of it does err on the grimmer side, you can also find the Tom Hardys and Idris Elbas of the world scooting over barren lands that are clearly on the way out. The modern Mad Max is a dying world, but people still tend to see it as cool rather than depressing. So, is it mainstream media that we must blame for this? Well, kinda, but you may notice that most of the fiction I've mentioned is from the last 50 years or so, from the 1980s onwards. This time is filled with trendy, smooth and iconic fashion and saw a new age of magazines, tabloids, the internet and eventually social media. Aesthetic became the uncrowned monarch of the world, and long before we got AI-generated horrors haunting Instagram and Pinterest, we had art and artists turning the bleakest scenes possible into stunning vistas of glory. No shades on the quality and skill of the artist, just the subjects tended to make industrial hellscapes beautiful? They shouldn't be beautiful, but they are, in these artworks. Before that, fiction which dealt with the world's end tended not to be that smooth and cool about it. If anything, it was unpleasantly blunt. In relation to both all that I've just said and all that I will say going forward, I have my own personal feelings to consider when writing about this. The 1950s to 60s is a time I'm feeling increased sympathy for, as they faced situations equivalent to what many are facing today in terms of worldwide conflict and social disruption. Not to mention potential nuclear responses if things really get out of hand. People within that time created some of the most harrowing and potentially depressing pieces of media dealing with what they at the time saw as a world-ending scenario. Two of the most harrowing are On the Beach and Failsafe. On the Beach is a look at a group facing inevitable death from radiation exposure. The film released in 1959, and even if the book covers topics that US films at the time wouldn't dare touch, its film version still doesn't pull its punches. Meanwhile, Failsafe was released in 1964 and showed the possible real consequences of something going disastrously wrong with nuclear deployment. These two films don't have happy endings, and they don't exactly romanticize or glamorize what is an end-of-life story for potentially our entire species, if not all life on Earth. Two others that are notable, released in the 1980s, are The Day After and Threads. These two films, one American and one British-Australian, show in appalling detail the social and psychological aftermath of nuclear war. Am I focusing a lot on nuclear? Yes, mostly because we're going through a period where multiple nuclear-based powers are being run by people who behave alternately like idiots, lunatics and megalomaniacs. I have to remember that according to scientific research, the results of nuclear war likely wouldn't be as completely catastrophic as has often been portrayed. It's still a very bad thing, but not completely world-ending. there would need to be more factors at play, and even then, some form of life would survive. I guess even I'm looking for the silver lining in this situation. So, leaving aside nuclear, what about other glamorized or gamified end-of-world scenarios? Well, for biological war, we need only look as far as Resident Evil, which is a whole franchise where multiple well-sculpted soldier or soldier-adjacent types slaughter revenants created by a virus. Low-key, just look for art of Chris Redfield, and a lot of it will be more than suggestive, and some of it is even official. Yes, I've got the hots for him, but that doesn't change my point. In this setting, the, quotes, ugly people tend to be the scientists who create the problematic virus, and boy is that a can of worms we don't have time to unpack. And especially in the initial film series, the disaster is portrayed as truly world-ending, and the heroes, oh boy, some makeup people and hairstylists must have survived the apocalypse because they look fine. Environmental disasters are common, especially in modern media, but often have that smooth, Vogue-style approach. I'm sorry if that makes some people cringe, which makes any content films might otherwise have fall rather flat. As we're finding, real environmental crises aren't pretty. So, what titles don't tend to glamorize? What's on the other side of this debate? Well, books, obviously. They have the license to go all out on grim and grimy detail. Harlan Ellison's Boy and His Dog series isn't exactly happy reading and strongly influenced other grim takes on the future. The full manga version of Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind goes for a strongly fatalistic tone, and the original books of Dune and Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep are, well, they are what they are. Heck, William Gibson's Neuromancer started what's often just a cool subculture aesthetic nowadays, and it's not romanticising anything about its protagonist or situation of a corporate-run cyberpunk dystopia. Radio also gets away with a lot more than you might think, as it has the license of imagination to fill in the gaps. Television can also have a surprising amount of freedom to be less than glamorous, often due to budget. If you want an example of that, the Jon Pertwee era Doctor Who story The Silurians is an extremely unflattering look at factionalism and paranoia. And I will say, modern media, specifically games and movies, is being more willing to show people who aren't conventionally handsome or beautiful in situations that are actually pretty horrible. As much as I dislike how fatalistic and pointlessly sad they are, the Last of Us series does sidestep several apocalypse portrayal issues one might find in other mainstream pieces of media. There are obviously exceptions to be found, games and films that either subvert or avoid the aesthetically pleasing wasteland apocalypse. Oddworld, for example. Some of the recent Star Wars spin-offs are also willing to look at the ugly side of the rebellion and some of the awkward realities of what an eternal war between two concepts played on a galactic scale might look like to people who have little to no stake in it beyond getting executed or ostracized by either side. Knights of the Old Republic 2, Andor, even the Clone Wars series to a point. It's stuff that says, wait a minute, this isn't glamorous. There is another factor here, one which you may have noticed. All the examples I've mentioned have fallen to varying degrees within sci-fi, but the same issues tend to apply to fantasy. Well, I say issues in quotes, but in the case of fantasy it's more about choice. And there's also a lot more leeway to have a Ragnarok-style restart or a Deus Ex Machina situation. And yet again, there can be occasional clashes between aesthetic dictates of adaptations or visualizations and the original authorial intent. If you want a big and obvious example, there's the contrasting appearances between the book and television versions of the same characters in George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire series. There are whole analysis videos on the subject, just take care when searching, it's a complete rabbit hole. So, is there anything good to say about the post-apocalyptic setting, romantic or not? Well, surprisingly, Even some highly unreal settings tend to be very egalitarian. Strange sentence, but think about it. Most disaster movies, at least the ones that live in the popular consciousness, frequently focus on the misfortunes and either tragic deaths or deserved comeuppance of a higher income bracket. Airport, earthquake, avalanche, the towering inferno, Titanic, the Hindenburg, all have a glamorous sheen painted over them, which I'm sure many people loved seeing stripped away, even if those based on real life events had the added sting of being, well, based on real life events where people actually died. There are obvious exceptions, such as the unjustly maligned Meteor, which also highlight everyday people alongside experts and all the elite, but until the 2000s those were exceptions more than rules. Since then, highlighting the plight of the common people through terrible events has become practically de rigueur, an interesting inversion, though it still carries a taint of that earlier appeal of watching people suffer. This may seem like quite the deviation from nuclear wastelands and climatic upheavals, but if you look, post-apocalypses also tend to veer away from a focus on the leisured and ruling classes. The disaster has made distinctions meaningless, and when they're maintained, they're shown as a relic. So, what's the takeaway? Basically, modern popular media really has to take a lot of the blame here. We enjoy watching people who are in some way attractive or charismatic or forceful or what have you. Since its origins, Hollywood, and by extension a lot of wider media, has placed aesthetic beauty above anything else. It's very Dorian Gray-esque. No matter how ugly it is under the surface, on the surface it's perfection. It's probably why most people who become world leaders lack any qualification except the ability to stand on a podium and say absolutely nothing in 3,000 words or more. They've got the look. And if you don't go beyond the aesthetic, you might actually like a future dystopia with its incredible vistas and trendy fashions. But just think about the social realities of that place and ask yourself, could you really, truly live there? I know this episode is rather rambling, but it can be really difficult to look at depictions of the future, of cyberpunk and dark futures and bleak fantasy, and still see modern beauty standards and cool aesthetics be what's remembered. I know I'm guilty of some part of this in my own work, trying to create descriptions of characters that can be appealing or create a handsome visual, either human or non-human, but I acknowledge that it can be a real fault. I caught myself doing it in my work more than once, and more than once made a conscious effort to move away from the aesthetically pleasing. In Lost Station Sodacy, for example, shameless plug I know, I have one character with two very ugly artificial arms, and a pair of twins with mirrored scar-like birthmarks that deform their faces. And when I did make characters handsome or beautiful, I didn't make their personalities to match. I made them awkward or scheming or cowardly. I guess at the end of it all, it comes down to judging by appearances. And in the world of mainstream media, appearances are usually glamorous. I guess even a barren, depleted, scorched and dying planet can be beautiful if you play the right music and put a sex symbol in a revealing, rugged outfit in the foreground. It's in that latter, and I admit somewhat snarky part, that I think some key part of breaking the stereotype lies. People have near infinite variety. Even just in the village where I live, there are plenty of people who fall both within and outside the narrow beauty paradigm still held by a lot of mainstream media. But I tend to see those perfect complexions, those ideal faces, the figures du jour, and think, wow, they've probably got terrible personalities, or gosh, what's holding it all together and will it melt in front of a fan heater? A little petty, I admit. Similarly, environments can be inverted. Jungles can hold endless traps and dangers within their beauty. A sweeping desert is still a desert. A ruin, however picturesque, is the remnant of something that once existed. Majestic oceans are covering land that was once used and lived on and farmed. Should we remove the glamorized futures and pasts? No, of course not. They can be a lot of fun, provided they're not portrayed as the norm. I think that more than anything is what can get my goat. The idealized and unrealistically perfect or aesthetically stunning being the norm, when reality can never be like that. People aren't flawless, places aren't always great to be in, and sometimes a post-apocalypse is a pretty unpleasant place to be. Thank you for listening if you got this far through my vague scripted ramblings. If you want some more coherent explorations of some of the topics touched on herein, I can thoroughly recommend Overly Sarcastic Productions and Jacob Geller as great starting points. This was a much more stream of consciousness type episode, and hopefully the next one will be more coherent. I'm hoping it's going to be about a short story. If you like this episode, please check out other episodes of my podcast and, if you're on YouTube, other things I've done. More episodes of this series will be coming in the near future, probably next month. That I'm managing to keep up that kind of routine, thank goodness. If you'd like to support me, you'll find links to my latest book in the description below. Lost Station Cersei, the second entry of the science fiction space opera series The Cluster Cycle. The third entry, The Murderer's Lament, is undergoing edits at this very moment. If you enjoyed, then do like, share and subscribe for more content that will come in the future, I promise. So, ladies and gentlemen and everyone in between, see ya! Okay, this is the beginning of my recording. This will be part of the outtakes, which there probably will be a lot, because whatever. So if you hear cars in the background, that's just Wales in summer at the moment. The tourists are a menace. You know something is wrong with the world when you are asking it day to day. Not day to day. You know something is wrong with the world when you're asking it day by day not to provide more writing material for a dystopian thriller where the world will inevitably blah 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 blah. 2 outtakes in the space of less than a minute. I think this is a record. The world will inevitably be blown blah blah, but not again. Okay, I am just gonna cut that last bit because it's tripping me up too much. What was I thinking? Maybe because, for the past 30 to 40 years, and through many different media, we've been... Not again! Okay, this recording is getting off to a very bad start. This time, in what might be a shorter episode... Oh god, cars. Not again. Okay, the cars at the moment are being very, very loud. A phenomenon that is... I'm recording at nearly 10 bloody PM. How are there traffic now? Okay, I've tried multiple attempts at things. It's not working. I'm going to have to do this in the evening when there's less traffic around. Okay, I have rigged up a makeshift sound blocking, sound shielding, sound deflecting thing. Hopefully this will improve the overall sound quality, although I'm noticing that my voice is sounding like it's coming from a great distance because of the positions I'm needing to enact. This needs some more tweaking, I think. Okay, is this any better? Is this any better? Testing, 1, 2, 3, 4. Ba-ba-da-ba-da-ba. Well, if that registers on the mic, I need to either do some more tweaking or this setup isn't working. Damn it. Came out in 1959, and even the original book covers topic. I'm going to need to rewrite that. But the timing for the end of that bit of clip recording was so good, a very loud car just drove past. Yikes, it's past 10 o'clock now. And especially in the films, the virus is portrayed as truly like a car that drives past and ruins the recording. Ugh. There is another factor here, one that you may have noticed. All the examples I've mentioned have fallen into varying degrees within sci-fi, but the same issues tend to apply to fantasy. Well, I say issues in quotes, but in the case of fantasy it's more about choice, and there's also a lot more leeway to have a Ragnarok style restart or a car driving by. I'm gonna have to redo that bit anyway, damn it. This may seem like quite the deviation from nuclear wastelands and climatic upheavals, but if you look, cars tend to still drive at 22:19 PM. And a pair of... Sorry, that was a car again. Okay, it is 10:30 and I somehow managed to record this entire episode with barely any outtakes and barely any road noise interfering with it, which is wonderful. There are disadvantages of living next to what for around here is a major road at the height of tourist season. Because people live here, this is a working location, you know. It's not just a tourist trap. Or at least it shouldn't be. Am I being bitter at the moment? I think I'm being bitter at the moment. Oh, the world has made me so bitter.